The best learned lessons that we'll ever have, the lessons that we'll know the longest, are always the ones that we learn the hard way. I typically learn things the hard way. There's just something about being stubborn and ornery that means that you're going to learn it the hard way. You will not listen to the people who say, just listen to me, trust me, this is what you should be doing. You're like, nope, we're going to do it this way. And then some months later, you're like, I guess you were right.
This is A Joyful Rebellion, the podcast that explores that moment you realize the life and success you worked so hard to create didn't come with all the fulfillment you thought it would. I'm your host, James Walters, and I want you to be the author of your own story. Each week, I connect with people who inspire bold answers to the question, what do I do now to create a life I love? If you're ready to start answering that question for yourself, you're in the right place. So let's start a joyful rebellion. My guest today is Ari Gunzburg, an award-winning speaker and coach who is working to solve human disconnection. Ari inspires people using personal stories filled with triumph, tragedy, and transformation, and draws on his experience in the great healing domain of nature to give hope and light to others. He's the author of the popular parable, The Little Book of Greatness. We talk about some of the modern distractions that contribute to disconnection and how to be more aware of them. Then we discuss Ari's 5 keys of greatness. I'm excited for you to hear this episode, so let's get it going. Ari Gunzburg, thank you so much for being here on A Joyful Rebellion. You wrote a book called The Little Book of Greatness. In it, you list these 5 keys to greatness, and I want to talk a lot about that, but what made me want to talk to you in the first place, I read your bio, and you're really into being out in nature. You love nature. You think it helps with disconnection. I have this theory that we're so connected now that we've lost connection, as we don't even know what it's all about anymore.
The word connection does not mean what we think or want it to mean. As people will say all the time, I'm connected. And you're like, yeah, you're not.
Yeah, you're connected in the way you understand it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why I moved to the word when I was like looking at that branding stuff. And I'm in the middle of a new project with that stuff. But that's why I moved to the word belonging. I think belonging is good and important. We should have that sense of belonging. But the belonging that I like to talk about, and I'm shifting a little bit away from this way of talking about it because it's being used to mean something else. But the belonging that I'm talking about is just feeling like you have a sense of togetherness and a sense of being there with the people that we're with. And if you ever have a group of friends and you feel like so connected to them, that's like an amazing feeling, right? You're sitting there and you're interacting and you're connecting and you're talking and you're laughing and you're enjoying yourself, and that's good. But a lot of what's going on nowadays is that a lot of us are zombieing around, connected on our phones to a whole bunch of stuff that is not really truly connected. And then we lose that joy of life. You sit down with a bunch of friends at a pub and you're just enjoy it. It could be a pub. It doesn't have to be a pub, right? If somebody's not drinking, but if you sit down with a bunch of friends at a cafe and you're talking, laughing, enjoying yourselves, and you lose yourself in the moment and you're in this state of creating, interacting, and being with people, like that's what I'm talking about. Is like a sense of community, which I think also like with a lot of the extremes and rhetoric that the political system and general media, like everybody keeps on pulling more to the opposite poles, and we're losing that sense of community and that sense of this is where I belong in the world, right? Because I have my community, let's say it's a religious community, so my church, my synagogue. I have my community like my people that I enjoy spending time with from work. I have my community like my family. I have my community like my friends. And so instead of having all of these things where people are engaging with each other that we've had for so long, right? We don't have that. We have our cell phones. And most of us are just interacting one-on-one with our cell phones. And sometimes there's people on the other end of that, which is fine. But a lot of the times it's really not. Did you ever read like the Laurel Ingalls Wilder books when you were growing up? Little House on the Prairie and all those?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so I mean, any one of these books from like a couple hundred years ago where they tell these stories, and sometimes it's fiction, sometimes it's not, but they're describing what it's like to have lived back then. So you have a town, and the town has a couple hundred people in it or something, and it's time for somebody to build a barn because the whole town is growing and they need to have more place for livestock or whatever. The whole town is like, it's a barn raising day, and they get everybody together and they put a barn up in a day. Something happens to somebody in the town and people are aware that something just happened and they're like, we need to do something for them. They go and they drop food off and clothing and shelter, and they're very connected with the needs of the people around them. And in this day and age, we're hyper disconnected from everything around us. We feel connected, right? Oh, I've got my phone.
You feel what's going on.
That's
yeah.
And a
Yeah.
GoFundMe is great. When somebody needs some money and everything, it can definitely help. But we're on this reckless path of endangerment where we just, I don't know, we keep on just getting into this situation where we're just further and further apart from what makes us the greatest species out there, is the fact that we're able to talk and interact and build each other up. And we're losing that with the cell phones. It's pretty hard.
Yeah, that is tough. And you are a really big proponent of nature being one of the answers to creating more connection.
Yeah, I personally really enjoy being out there. The hard thing is, and this is like the balance and everything, is that I'm still an entrepreneur. I'm still trying to run my business. And these are like the things that I think about. And I'm like, I wonder what I should do about that. My cell phone, a lot of times I have it with me because it's one of my recording devices for taking videos and photos while I'm outdoors.
Yeah.
I try to be very specific. Like I'm in do not disturb mode, totally engaged with what's going on around me. But A, it's not always possible. And B, a lot of people, if they bring their cell phone out with them, they're going to be like, no, I have to post this to Instagram right now because I have service. And you're like, no, just be there. Just be there. That's it. It's hard. One combatant for that is if you want to take your phone with you to track your route, turn your phone on airplane mode or whatever. Turn it on like absolutely do not disturb so that nobody can get in touch with you so that you can have that moment, because we need those contemplative moments and cell phones are taking those away from us.
I agree with that. And I also, when I started to read some of your work, the first thought I had when it comes to being in nature and some of that feeling of disconnection, I almost wasn't even thinking about connection or disconnection with other people. I was thinking about connection, disconnection with myself, my own hopes and dreams, my own thoughts. And I've found that being in nature, not necessarily with other people, because then there are conversations going on and that kind of thing. But sometimes if I just take a walk, I've got a greenway here. It's right beside the river, all kinds of stuff to look at and experience as I'm going through. Even though it's kind of a what we might call sanitized experience, it's a paved path. It's generally safe. I'm not worried about grizzly bear running out and do anything getting me, but still it allows me to just shut part of my brain off and reconnect with myself in a way that I am more present. I find that I take that back when I do go back to work, because we all have to.
You're 100% right. Being more connected is important, to be more connected to ourselves, as cell phones are stealing that. And it's more important to be connected to the people around us because we're social creatures. The cell phones are taking that away from us as well. And it's not like I'm innocent of this or anything. I'm trying to figure out how to not be on my cell phone as much. But then we've got something to do when the cell phone is in your pocket and it's a giant computer that can do almost anything. It doesn't do it as efficiently. I'll tell you, doing emails on your computer is probably 5 times as fast as doing it on your cell phone. But it feels like you're being productive. You're like, let me just get this done. If you sat down and did email on your computer, you'd be done a lot faster than if you're doing email on your phone. So there are moments where you're on a trip and you just need to get one thing done because you need to close the sale or you need to respond or whatever. So like those are the moments that the cell phones are great for. But we take that and use it as 100% all the time. Speaking of being more connected to ourselves and being outdoors, first of all, if you're going to do an active brainstorming session, which it sounds like is one thing that you're doing, I highly recommend that you do an environment very similar to what you're talking about. Paved path with no routes to trip on, or almost paved, like the equivalent thereof, and like in a small park where you're not going to get lost. Because this way, it allows you to get that nature experience, but also allows you to sit there and say, I'm going into the nature experience to be in that environment, but I'm going with the purpose of doing an active brainstorming session, i.e., I'm going to be walking and moving while I'm brainstorming. And this allows you to get your exercise, but also allows you to be spending your time brainstorming and things like that. The complex trails where there's a potential for getting lost, those are not the places to be doing that active brainstorming session. Well, I'm brainstorming really carefully, but I didn't see that cliff face right next to me. That's not really the place. You know, you really want to be super focused on what's happening in front of you right then. I actually just took my 9-year-old son to Angel's Landing. That's off in Zion. It's like a super cool hike that has like chains for the last part of the hike, and there's a lot of sheer drop-offs the entire way and everything like that. So like the whole time I'm like, just move slow and be safe. I was saying it so much that he got upset at me a couple times. He's like, don't you trust me? And I'm like, of course I trust you, but I still want you to move slow and safe because we're in a dangerous environment. If we're feeling like we need to rush, that's when mistakes start to happen. We don't need to. Just move slow, deliberate, and safe. And so that's when you're doing those types of hikes, you really need to focus on what's happening in front of you. But if you're doing active brainstorming, yeah, definitely. Paved path, local park, love it. I do it not as much as I do sometimes because I haven't really found a great park close to my house for doing that. But yeah, I love the idea for active brainstorming in nature.
It certainly gives the ability for a change of pace. If I'm trying to do something creative, I find that I have to change my environment. For example, if I need to do creative writing, I don't really do that well in my office. I need to go somewhere, even if it's somewhere that is still indoors. It's typically somewhere with a lot of light. It's somewhere with a comfy chair where I can sit with a notepad and scratch down ideas, not with a keyboard, not really with a lot of structure. But what do you think it is about being outdoors? What do you think it is about being in nature that allows people to reconnect either with themselves or with other people, or even just get that sense of being human again that they tend to lose with the day-to-day drudgery of being indoors all the time?
There's so many different directions to go with this. There is some science that suggests that there's a physical, tangible benefit to being outdoors, like something about the idea that trees actually exude these aerosols that fight problems inside of our body. So right there is a physical benefit to going outdoors, but really more in line with what you're asking. I think that the world, and I know everybody has their own opinions on how and why the world was created, but as long as we could just agree that there is a higher power of some sort, then let's just go with that and everything. So the world was created as this place for us to love, enjoy, and see and experience. And a big part of that was the natural wonders. If you look around, like that's one thing I was telling my son when we were with him, there is a spot, I think it's in the Ethics of the Fathers, where it says that you have to tell yourself that the world was created for me. And obviously, if you think that the world was only created for you, that's a problem, right? You can't live like that either. But like, you have to recognize that this was done for me. And I'm like trying to explain to him, we're driving down here and God was like, one day, thousands of years from when I'm creating this world, this guy is going to be driving this kid down this particular highway in the Red Rock Canyon in Nevada or in Zion National Park. And he's going to be like, look, you see these mountains? They were created for you. And you could be like, wow, we're here to see and experience the world. And we miss so much of that when we're inside. The virtual world is cool. And there are things that it can let us experience that we maybe never would experience. If somebody ever does a cave, scuba diving, VR thing, I would definitely want to check that out because I think it probably would be very interesting to do cave scuba diving. The level of risk involved in that is higher than I'm willing to accept.
Yeah, without dying, because I'm not up for that either.
I'll go caving. I love scuba diving, but to the idea of putting the two of them together, I'm just like, not so much.
Hard no from me.
Yeah, exactly. There's so many things out there to experience. Nobody can really experience them all, but there's so many things out there that we can experience. And so when we go and we get this sense of awe and the sense of wonder by standing at the base of a mountain that towers up 6,000 feet above us, like in Yosemite or something like that, or 4,000 feet or whatever it is, and you're just standing there and you all of a sudden start to recognize that the world is so much larger and so much grander than anything that we could have possibly imagined. It creates some humility, which humility is never a bad thing. Too much obviously could be a bad thing, but humility is always good. And then if you're sharing it with somebody else also, right? If you go out with a kid or with a spouse or with a friend or a parent or whatever, it creates an additional connection also because you just did that together. Now you have a story. Even if nothing wrong happened the whole time, you at least have a story. A guy was sitting across from us on the shuttle bus going out to Angel's Landing, and we were talking for a little bit. So he had done it before. I had done it before. I was taking my son. He was taking his dad and his brother. We ran from the bus. They got behind slightly because they did some stuff before they went on the trail. They passed us on the trail because I was moving slower because I had a 9-year-old with me. They went up to the top, and when we were getting to the top, they were coming down. So we ran into them again there. And then, lo and behold, we're sitting there in the airport. I'm talking to the gate agent because we had some travel mix-ups and everything. And they're sitting right there at the airport. I'll probably never see them again in my life. But we had this whole little additional bond and everything. I'm trying to think of the best way to articulate this. And I'm not sure that I have the best way to articulate it. I can tell you that if you go out by yourself, you'll find that you feel more connected to yourself when you come back. And I can tell you that if you go out to nature with friends, you'll feel more connected to the people you went with when you come back. There's almost never going to be a time where you're going to go out there and be like, man, we shouldn't have gone. Yeah. Obviously plan properly and don't do stupid things.
As long as you get back safe.
There's a lot more detail to go into there, but I'm saying if you are being wise of mind and you're being properly prepared, there's rarely a time that you're going to hear of somebody who's, oh man, we shouldn't have gone.
Something you said a minute ago, really, this is one of the questions I wanted to talk about. You talked about essentially being in nature and having that sensation where you just, as a person and a human, you feel small in scale compared to everything you're looking at. And I've had that exact same thing happen in nature, whether it was scuba diving in the open ocean, and you just get that sense of vastness and you're in the middle of it and you can't really see very far, and then you can't see the bottom yet, and then you float down and things start to come into view and you see everything that's going on down there. And there's that just little bit of, oh God, what have I gotten myself into sense of things. And it depends on what is swimming around you. So there was that. But then I had this experience with my kids. It was a couple of years ago, and we did go out to Nevada, went to Red Rock Canyon, and we were like, oh, this is really cool. And let's get the red rocks, very different. We're from the East Coast, so completely different landscape, things we'd never really seen before. Yep. And that was fun to share. But then about 3 days later, we drove out to the Grand Canyon, and none of us had ever been there before. We're sitting on the, I guess it's the southern rim of the thing, just looking out into this vastness. And I'm just looking at it, and I'm thinking to myself, this looks fake. My brain had no way to process it because I'd never seen anything on that scale before in my life.
Yep.
I grew up on the East Coast in the ocean, so I can look out and see the ocean, but it's really just flat water, and it goes as far as you can see, and there's a horizon. But I'd never seen a place that had that much detail, had that many colors going on, and was just so massive, with little old me standing there trying to make sense of it. And I could not put words to what that felt like. But I think what you just said about humility hits it on the head in some ways. Just, wow, the world is so much bigger than me. And I couldn't decide in the moment if that gave me peace or if it made me anxious, but it definitely gave me a sense of awe. And I think it lightened my mood a little bit. It was really impactful either way.
Definitely. And the Grand Canyon is absolutely mind-blowing. We were talking about going, but our trip was so short that it would have been a Herculean effort of driving on my part in order to make it happen. And really, our main goal was to spend time in Zion and to get Angel's Landing. So we did Kolob Canyon the week before. The weather was supposed to be bad in Zion. We were talking about going to Bryce on Sunday morning. We ended up doing Red Rock because it was right nearby. Bryce would have been cool, but Bryce was closed down because of snow. And then we did Zion. And again, we meant to spend more time in Zion, but we didn't. So it just is what it is. But it's this interesting thing with this sense of awe, wonder, and humility and everything. So when I think about myself in comparison to like a multinational conglomerate or multinational corporation and everything, it doesn't necessarily give me a good feeling of peace and humility. I surely feel humble when I'm thinking of these massive corporations compared to myself. They're worth billions and billions of dollars that are sitting there and pushing and pulling and doing all of these things, whatever it is they're doing. But it doesn't necessarily give me that good feeling that I walk away and I'm like, ooh, wow, like I feel like a better changed person now. But nature, yes, it's going to make us feel humble and small and everything, but in general, in my experience, in a good way.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. You're sitting there, you're looking at the vastness of the Grand Canyon. You're not really sure exactly over a little bit of time, right? And you sit there and you do a hike and you start to walk in. You're like, okay, this is vast, but it's also accessible. I can also get places. I can also do the rim to rim. I didn't get the chance to do the rim to rim when I was there. You have the vastness of standing on the rim and looking out over all of that space. That's the macro. And then you also have the micro where you're like, okay, I'm going to go on this K-Bab trail and everything where like you start the rim to rim hike and you're like, okay, now I have a little bit more of the micro. I still see the macro because I can see everything around me. Now I'm like in it and on this one specific trail and I just have to focus on my zone and my space and everything. We walk away from these experiences changed. If you look back in your life at the things that are most memorable and the things that have the best stories, they're usually the things where, unfortunately, things went the most wrong. You don't want to say to people like, oh man, I wish everything goes wrong for you. But on the other hand, like when things go wrong, that's when you have the story of, oh man, you should have been there. This happened and then this happened and then this happened.
I'd like to talk about the book you wrote called The Little Book of Greatness. And it's about a hike, isn't it?
There are hikes inside of it. Yeah, there's some outdoor stuff inside of it. Not as much. It took me some time to realize that the outdoors is more central to my life and that I should bring that more into my work. I think when I first started, I thought to separate the two. And it was only a couple years in that I realized that I really should integrate the two.
Okay.
So the book is really about a journey that a guy takes. Not like an actual journey, but like a mental journey that a guy takes. Everything is not quite working. And so he's looking for answers. Somebody sends him to go find out about the 5 keys to greatness. And so he runs and he talks to one main person who sends him to 5 different people. And then he goes and learns about each one of the 5 keys throughout the course of the book. Just to run through the 5 keys briefly, I'm assuming that's what you...
Yeah, if you're good to do that now.
Yeah, so the first one is to be more giving, to provide for the people around us with money, time, compassion, anything like that. The second one is reason, to have more of a defined purpose for living. Think of like Simon Sinek's Start With Why. The third one is engage, to be more present in the moment. And this touches a lot upon the things we've already been talking about. Try and put the phone down, try and be a little bit more with the people that you're with instead of being constantly wrapped up in the phone or in really in anything else. If you mean to be wrapped up in something, I think that's really truly being present in the moment with what you're doing. It's when you don't mean to be wrapped up with something and you are, like when we're highly distracted. That's really what I'm talking about.
Yeah, or you look down and you're like, oh, I've already checked my email. Gee, I checked it 30 seconds ago. Why is it in my hand again?
Yeah, it's pretty bad. A big case in point is a lot of us might ruminate on the past or the future, which we don't mean to do. That's not to say that it's bad to sit there and say, what this happened. Let me evaluate what happened in the past and think about how I should look at it and how I should deal with it. That's not a problem because you're doing it on purpose. Walking around in your daily activities and being like, I shouldn't have said that. I can't believe I said that. Why did I say that? That's the unhealthy part, right? And the future, same thing, right? Constantly worrying or wishing for the future is not helping us move forward, but having a future brainstorming session where I say, this is what I would like my future to look like. That's being present with what you're doing.
Yeah.
So that's the third key, is engage, being present. The fourth key is amazing, which is just a keyword to remember the concept of thinking positively. So like whenever things happen to us, we can't always control what we get, but we can always control the way that we look at it.
Yeah.
That's building upon a lot of different works. And there's the Pygmalion effect that shows that a lot of times we get what we see. There's the Charles Swindoll's quote, life is 10% of what happens to us and 90% of how we react to it. And Viktor Frankl with the Man's Search for Meaning. And I know that the big thing that he talks about is that the Nazis were able to take away everything from him, but his power to decide how he was going to react to what was happening. That's a very nutshell understanding of that book that I have. And then the last key is tenacity and persistence. And again, there's times to apply that and times not to, right? If we're doing something and it's not the right thing and we're not supposed to be doing it, and we realize that this is barking up the wrong tree, it's okay to walk away from things and say, this is just not me, and this is not who I am, and this is not who I want to be. It's not finish all projects under penalty of not being persistent, but there are a lot of things that we do that we should be doing and that are going to help us and that will be amazing and will do great things for the world, but the world will come in and do everything that it can to stop us. I'm not sure why it does that. I guess it's to make the victory that much sweeter, but the world will do everything it can to try and get it to not happen. When we see that's happening, that's when we're like, I'm just going to continue on this path and make it happen and make it happen, make it happen. You know, there's always naysayers, whether it's within ourselves or people externally. But if it's something that should be happening, don't listen. You can't listen to them. But you got to sit there and just hold it near and dear in your heart and sit there and do everything you can to make it happen. Some examples that come to mind that I talk about a lot of briefly in my speeches are like Martin Luther King. Everybody's like, you can't do that. You can't change all this stuff. And he's like, can't. I have to. There's no other way to go forward. Harriet Tubman with the Underground Railroad, right? If she had listened to people say, that's illegal, then like, where would we be today? Thomas Edison with the light bulb, right? I found 1,000 ways to not make a light bulb, and now I finally found one that works. What if he had stopped at 900? 900 is too much. It's impossible.
Yeah.
Okay, then it wouldn't be him. I'm saying somebody else would have figured it out.
Yeah.
And Susan B. Anthony also, she was women's suffrage. She said, it's gotta happen. It gotta happen. And she had a vision, held on to it, did not listen when people said there's no point, and continued forward. And now we all know who she is because she was able to sit there and channel that persistence. So that's the 5 keys.
Okay.
And the easy way to remember them is just remember the word great, GREAT.
Okay.
So give, reason, engage, amazing, tenacity.
All right. I like it. What I'm curious now is, how did you learn those lessons? Did you learn them the hard way? I know there's a hard way and an easy way to learn. And
I am
quite often these lessons are learned not the easy way, I've found in my experience. So what led to you discovering this way of being?
The best learned lessons that we'll ever have, the lessons that we'll know the longest, are always the ones we learn the hard way. I typically learn things the hard way. There's just something about being stubborn and ornery that means that you're going to learn it the hard way. You will not listen to the people who say, just listen to me, trust me, this is what you should be doing. You're like, nope, we're going to do it this way. And then some months later, you're like, I guess you were right. Not always. There's plenty of times where people say, cannot be done, should not be done. And I sit there and say, no, let's figure it out. And I find a way around it that people didn't see before.
Yeah.
As far as the learning those lessons, most likely the hard way over the years. But I came up with it. I just brainstormed for a long time. I had a lot of time one summer and in a car driving a lot. I drove like almost 9,000 miles. While I was in the car over that summer, I was listening to books and listening to music and doing other stuff. But while I was doing it, I was running these thoughts through my mind, trying to get it down to as few as possible. And the interesting thing about them is that a lot of people might say, but there's only 5. There's so many other things that are part of a good life. And you say, yes, I'm pretty sure. I didn't check everything, but I'm pretty sure anyone that you will mention to me, I will tell you it's a subcategory of one of the top 5.
Yeah. A lot of times that's how things come together like that. You take your whole life experience and then you just try to distill it as much as possible into something like a roadmap. That leads me to wonder, when you are talking to audiences, because you go all over the place talking to audiences of different kinds, when you have these talks, inevitably you're going to get people who come up and relate to what you're talking about, or maybe challenge what you're talking about. But when people do come up and they give you their story, because that's often what happens. Yeah, what you were talking about, I relate to that. And then they tell you why. When it comes to the nature piece, is there something that comes up a lot for people, like after hearing you speak and after hearing maybe your suggestions in the 5 keys to greatness? Is there a story that seems to be consistent of people that you interact with?
It's interesting in that there's a lot of people out there who are into nature and outdoors, and there's a lot of people out there who are not, or are not yet. Meaning, if I say to you, like, oh man, if you're feeling a little down, you should get up and go for a hike. Yeah. Or if you're feeling a little down, you should get outdoors and go do something in nature. You're like, yeah, oh, you're right. I got busy and I forgot about that. You're absolutely right. I'm going to go, let me look at my schedule. Okay, I'm going to do it in 3 hours when I can. And I'm just going to go, and I'm just going to get out there because I need to. There's a lot of people out there who are in love with the outdoors, and you say that to them, and all you're doing is reminding them of something that they already know. And then there's a lot of people out there who are like, no thanks. And you're like, but you're going to feel so much better afterwards. And they're like, yeah, no. They're like, bugs, too hot. It's too cold. There's too much rain. I'm worried about the bug bites. I'm worried about the snakes. I'm worried about the bears. I'm worried about the lions. I'm worried about like, just you name it. And what I really am trying to figure out is, how do we get them to get back into the outdoors? Because they're often the people who can benefit the most from it, right? We'll benefit from it clearly, but if they haven't been outdoors in a long time, caving's a sport that I talk about sometimes. I've been only a few times. Caving's very interesting. I think it's a lot like the outdoors, but it's applicable to more people, because there's a decent amount of people that if you're like, let's just go out and go for a hike, they might say yes, even though they wouldn't necessarily do it on their own. But caving is a very weird sport in the sense that most people, if you say, hey, let's go caving, their response is going to be absolutely not. I don't want to go.
Yeah, I would have a lot of questions personally.
But I will tell you that almost every single person that you can get to go caving, when they come out of the experience, will be like, that was one of the best experiences of my life.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
But most people aren't willing to do it, which is very strange. So it's the same idea in the outdoors, although it's a lot easier usually to convince somebody to go hiking. But most people are like, no, I don't want to do that because of this. No, I don't. And if you can just get them to go outdoors and get on that hike and go see that wild thing that's all less than an hour away from the house and everything, they'll come back and be like, that was amazing. It was Instagram worthy. It was this, it was that. I got great photos. I got this. And they're going to sit there and be talking about it for a while, but they don't usually get those things because they're not willing to go do it.
Yeah, I think just from a very early age for a lot of people, just in the popular fairy tales and all the things, caves are probably right up there with the old abandoned house on the hill in terms of, nothing good happens there. We should probably stay away from it. So when people think cave, they're probably automatically, oh, there's obviously bears in there, or Neanderthals that nobody remembered, or I don't know, cavemen, just bad.
Did you watch Descent? Did you watch The Descent? That's that horror movie set in the cave.
Oh, no, I never watched that.
Oh, it's very good, very scary, and I still go caving. I hear what you're saying. You're not wrong. Again, and a lot of people are just in their head, they're like, small closed spaces, just not interested.
Yeah.
But not all caves are small, tiny little closed spaces. I get uncomfortable in caves also. It's not like I go into a cave and I'm super comfortable. There's a lot of spaces inside of there that I'll be like very nervous. I've gotten pretty good over the years. You know that reaction we have of, oh, this is too much, I should stop and go away and quit.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So like I've gotten pretty good over the years of ignoring that, which hopefully will never lead me into trouble.
I'm having to take deeper breaths, just feeling a little claustrophobic talking about caves.
I did a couple mountains in Colorado, and within the first quarter mile of the 8.5 mile hike, my brain was like, this is too much, I should just go back. And it was funny because it used to be a struggle. I used to have to sit there and be like, no, I'm going to do it. And on this hike, I was just like, every 200 feet, I'd stop out of breath and be like, this is too much, I should just go back. And I just kept on going. I've worked that muscle enough. There were a couple of times I was having a headache, and I was like, I wonder if this is altitude sickness, or if this is severe enough that I should be worried. So then I didn't just sit there and ignore it and keep on going. I stopped. I checked in with myself, and I did like there's a limit to the evaluation you could do for yourself, but I did like okay, here's what's going on. What is my next step? And so, for instance, my wilderness first responder book suggests taking a little bit of Advil for that. Don't do that unless you have the training to do that, because some people tell you don't take that stuff because it masks the symptoms, but whatever. So I took some Advil, And then I said, I'm going to check back in 20, 30 minutes to see if the headache is still there. If it's still there, it's probably severe enough that I should be going down. If it's not, I should be able to be fine to keep on going. So I did that. But that was a real check-in, because you do have to be realistic and honest about what you're experiencing to stay as safe as possible in the outdoors, because the outdoors is quite unforgiving. My first Woodford instructor called it the great equalizer. The outdoors doesn't care who you are, doesn't care what color your skin is, doesn't care if you're male, if you're female, it could not care less about what you look like. All that's going to matter when you go outdoors is, do you know what you're doing? Did you bring the right gear? And do you know how to use it? And that's it. And do you know how to quit when you're ahead? And that's it.
It's like that meme I keep seeing come up on Instagram. It says there are dozens of dead overachievers on top of Mount Everest, so maybe just calm down. I'm glad you brought that up, though, because one of the things I want to talk about is I've done a lot of podcasts with people who help other people get more peace in their lives, or try to find more peace, overcome anxiety, or overcome depression, whatever the thing that is holding them back from living their best life. I've done some therapy myself, and a common theme that seems to come up is exactly what you said, the importance of checking in with what your body is telling you. And nature can certainly help you do that, because even if you're on the greenway, it might put little stresses or just bring things up for you. Are the bugs biting? Is the breeze a little too cool? Or, wow, I can really feel the sun on my skin right now. So it does force you in some ways to check in with your body. I know when I've gone scuba diving, there are dozens of little checks every second or so that I do. Okay, are my ears feeling the pressure? What is around me right now? So I'm constantly checking in, and it's forcing me to do that. What's been your experience with people you've worked with in seeing how they start to check in with themselves and check in with their body physically, and it helps them mentally? Have you noticed that trend?
Yes. The more that you can check in with yourself, the better. Going back to also what we talked about a lot before, when we are constantly on engaged mode, like constantly being fed data via our cell phones and just constantly checking email, checking socials, checking this, I have to respond, I have to take care of this. When we're constantly in that on mode, we lose out that opportunity to have that check-in moment with ourselves, to have that quiet contemplation. Either we don't have the science that shows us just how important that stuff is, or if we do, we're ignoring it. We used to live a much slower life. It was much easier to just be aware of like certain things, because we'd be like, oh, I don't like to do this thing, or I don't feel good about this, or maybe we should make a change about this. And now we're in such a constant state of on that we lose that moment of contemplation of, how are things going? Is this working? Is this working? Should I continue doing this? Should I stop doing this? Is this something that I want to find a way around? And getting out into nature, like we were saying, can give us that moment of, maybe check in with your body, what's going on, depending where you are, but also maybe check in with your life and see how things are going. Just evaluate, look things over. Are you heading in the right direction? That's a big part of the second key reason is, are we heading in the right direction? If you have a defined purpose, then it's pretty easy to say, here's where I want to be. Here's where I am. Am I going in the right way, or am I veering off course?
Yeah.
But if you don't have that defined purpose, then I don't know where I want to be. I'm just living.
The purpose of this podcast is really dedicated to those people who maybe woke up and they realized, oh man, I've been floating through life. I've been doing all the things I thought I was supposed to do. And even if they have some success at doing that because they decided on a certain career and they thought that career would give them the kind of life they wanted, and maybe it did. And then they look around, wow, I thought it would be different. And now I have to figure out what I want to do to recalibrate what that purpose is. Because I don't think just getting the good job, getting the house, getting the white picket fence was my purpose. I thought it was, but apparently that doesn't make me happy. So now what? Then they have to retool, recalibrate. And that's what I like to talk about here. And that's what we've been talking about pretty much this whole time, just awareness. And awareness is everything. And what you're saying and describing is with the 5 keys to greatness, and with also just creating that connection with ourselves by maybe being out in nature, we can create that awareness and be in the present so we can make change in our life. Because otherwise we're just floating around, right?
Yeah, and we're not accomplishing the things we mean to do or the things we want to do, if we're just floating around, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
We want to grow, most of us, and we want to, like Gandhi said, we want to be the change that we see in the world.
There's a lot to distract us from doing that.
Yeah, the more that we can be aware of all these things, certainly the better of a life.
So when you're talking to people and you're suggesting ways for them to carry out these 5 keys to greatness, what's that conversation like?
In the large groups?
Yeah, in the large groups.
By the time I'm up there and telling stories, and there's usually only like an hour and a half to sit there and talk and everything, there aren't necessarily specific examples of here's how you should go use it. One thing I ask people is to just commit to giving something to somebody over the next week. I like to think of the 5 keys as a framework instead of a system, because it's something that you can say, okay, let me just go take a walk and see how life is going. And then you can, on the walk, you can be like, okay, am I being giving enough? Could I introduce a little bit more giving into my life? Are there places that I could strengthen that?
Yeah.
Do I have that defined purpose? Is it really clear, or am I a little bit fuzzy on it? In which case, maybe I should get clearer on it. Work through each one of the 5 keys over the course of a walk, over the course of a few walks, and say, where am I really at? And then if you have evaluated and you're like, I could be a little bit more giving with my life, then the universe is going to sit there and throw something in your lap. And that's your time to actually take action, right?
Yeah.
You're going to be sitting there walking along, and somebody's backpack or like a little satchel will fall out of their stroller. And that's your opportunity to say, you know what, I'm going to run the 20 feet to go pick it up and hand it back to them. Somebody's going to drop their keys, and I can sit there and, oh, hey, let me give this back to you. I'm going to be walking into a store. Somebody's going to be behind me, and I'll hold the door open for them. Oh, I wouldn't have done it usually because they were 8 steps behind me instead of 2 steps behind me. Yeah, whatever. It's not such a big deal. I'll open it up. Oh, I'm getting into the line by the store and I really have to go, and somebody's in front of me. If somebody's like coming into the line at the same time, I can let them go. Being a little bit more aware of the fact that maybe you want to be more giving opens a lot of these things up for us, whereas before we might have been unaware that they were happening or just distracted or whatever. That's the idea, is to contemplate and then see that these things are available and then go ahead and do them.
Yeah, that's good advice. And if someone is listening right now and they say, yeah, I want to know more about this, what's the best way for people to connect with you and connect with your work?
The best URL to remember is just arigunz.com, arigunz.com. That forwards over to whatever is the most recent website that I have up to talk about all this stuff. Definitely feel free to reach out via social media or anything like that, because those are the places that I am usually active. I haven't been in some time, but I'm trying to figure out the best system to enable myself and my brain to be active on there without letting it become a huge time sink for myself.
It makes a lot of sense. It seems like there's always some new layer of social media to keep up with and figure out, and it's a lot. So
it's a lot.
I definitely get it, and all of that will be in the show notes as well. So if someone's listening right now and they want to connect, just go to the website, go to the show notes. It'll be right there, and click on it and connect with Ari. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to mention?
There's always stuff to talk about, but I feel like this is a good conversation. I feel like it went in good directions. Awareness of being more present is always really important, and I think gets ignored too much. And the more that we can all be more present in the moment and with people, I think the greater the world will end up being.
I've found that to be true in my life, and it sounds like you've found that to be at least one answer to some of the problems that we have just keeping us stuck.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Ari, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to connecting with you again soon.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Thanks so much for joining me today. And if you have an extra minute, I have a favor to ask. Some of you listen to this show on Apple Podcasts, and a lot of you I talk to are on Spotify or Amazon. I'd love it if you would take just a second to leave a rating or a review. It lets the platforms know that listeners are getting value from the show and suggest it to others who are interested in similar content. And as always, if you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a guest suggestion, or just general feedback, I'd love to hear about that too. Connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, or at ajoyfulrebellion.com.